Hey everyone, in this lecture we are going to discuss the concept of inheritance. So what is inheritance? Why do we need to talk about inheritance and how does it work? So inheritance is one of the most powerful concept features of object-oriented programming after classes. And it's basically a relationship, a type of relationship, because there are different types of relationship. We have composition, you have inheritance, you have other types of relationships. So inheritance is the relationship between classes that allows one classes or some classes to inherit, as the name implies, or access functions and other elements from other classes. So for example, if we have an employee class, and then I want to create another class called manager. Now, since manager and employee, they have a lot of things in common, so it makes sense to establish an inheritance relationship that allows the manager class to access the element that already exists in the employee class. So that will save us time and then allows what we call reusability. So, as we mentioned, there are two classes in this relationship. We have what we call the base class. Sometimes it's called parent class or superclass. All of them are terminology used by programmers. And then we have the derived class. That's like the subclass, or you can call it a child class. Okay. Now let's make it more clear here. So as you can see, this is an example of inheritance relationship. We have one superclass, the person class. It has the attributes, last name, first name, address, and other information. And then we have two subclasses, employee and customer. And both of them, they share a lot of information with the person class. So you cannot establish relationship with two classes. They have nothing to do with each other. They have nothing in common. Okay. So employee, part of the information here, we can inherit from the person, and then we can add other information specifically related to employee, and the same thing for customer. Okay. So this is also like a detailed um, another example with detailed information. Now let's get into a Visual Studio and then um, use an example, the employee and the manager classes as an example for inheritance relationship. So let me switch to the Visual Studio. So here I created a subfolder called employee info. And then I'm going to start with the first. Now, because of the video is going to be a little bit longer, so I decided to split it into two parts, part one and part two. In part one, I'm going to create the employee class. That's something that you should be familiar with because that has to do with the previous chapter. And then in the second part, then I will create the manager and then establish the inheritance relationship between the two. So this is what we do. We right click. And then we go add class. Now we talked about this. If we still have questions or you don't know how to create a class, please make sure you take time to watch the video that I posted in detail in the previous chapter. So we normally create the class by creating two files, the header file with you have only the prototypes, no implementation, and then the actual file with the code. Okay, so the name is employee. As you can see, automatically the program will create these two files, employee.h, that's the header file, and the CPP where the implementation is. So this one has nothing to do with inheritance, okay? So let's create the first class. So as I said, we already covered this part. So you start with, if not defined, this statement we added to make sure that we don't add this file more than one time. And then we put the employee underscore h. And then the second part we put define. So it means if not defined, define it, but only one time. So I'm going to put employee, the same thing, underscore H. And then make sure you put and F at the end. And F. Okay. As I mentioned, in this one, it's just the header file. I'm going to put the variable, privates. So we're going to use only 3 variables here. String, which is the name of the employee, and then the hours, how many hours per week, and then how much he gets paid per hour. Now here we need to add the necessary files. So we have to include IO string. We can include the string, and then using namespace std. Okay, and then after the variable, then we're going to go to the functions. Again, this is only the header file, there's no code. So we need the constructor. So we're going to use to employee the default constructor, and then the one that takes parameters from all these 3. So we have string, integer for the hours, and the pay rate double. And then we have the accessor. So we have get name, and then we have get hours, and then we have get pay rates. And then the modifiers, we have set name, takes a string, and then we have set hours, that takes an integer, and then set pay rate, that takes double. And then after that, we can add an extra function, weekly pay. Basically, you multiply the number of hours by the pay rate. And then finally, we're going to have a function called display. Basically, it just displays the information we have in here. So this is the first one. I don't think we are missing anything here. Now we're going to move on to the other file. So the other file, so as you can see, the program adds the employee.h to header file automatically, which we need. And then let's get started with the implementation. The first one that we have is the default constructor. And here we are going just to assign default value. And then hours, just 0. And then pay rate is 0.0. And then I'm just going to copy this and then add the other constructor, the one that takes parameters. So we have string n to match the name, and then we have h, and then we have a rate. So name will be n will be assigned to name, and then we have h will be assigned to hours. So if you remember, I told you that the constructor has 2 functions, has two roles to play. First one, it allows us to create an object. To create an object, you need that's what they call it, constructor, to construct. And the second function is to assign. That's what we are doing right now. We are assigning values to our variable, name, hours, and pay rate. So here we have rates, okay? And then we are going to continue with the rest. So the second one, we have employee get name. So this is returns the name. And then I'm just going to copy this to do it faster. So we have 3, since we have 3 variables or 3 attributes, so we need 3 accessor methods. So int, and then get hours. And the same thing for pay rates. So it's going to return double, get pay rate. Now we are done with the accessor. So of course I need to change this to hours, and this one should pay rates. And now we are going to continue with the modifiers. Sometimes they call them mutators. So they're all void, and they start usually with sets. So set name n, and then we're going to assign enter name. This is if you want to change the value. Okay, so just copy this. So we have void, this is set hours. So this is for changing the value for hours. So we have hours equals h. And then we're going to do the same thing with set pay rates. Let's say there is a wage increase or promotion. So this function allows us to change the rates, the pay rates. So it's double rates, pay rates equals rate. And then we have two more, the weekly pay. So it returns double because weekly pay is double. And then the name is, we call it weekly pay. Now let's assume here that there is an overtime. So overtime, if you get overtime, the employee gets overtime if you work more than 40 hours. So if you work less or equal than 40 hours, then there is no overtime. You're just going to return the hours multiplied by the pay rate, right? Else, this is on the overtime, so we can have a little variable overtime only for the extra. So you're going to subtract 40 from hours. Whatever, if you work, for example, 45 hours, you're going to get overtime only for the 5 hours, not for the whole thing. So the difference you pay by pay rate, and then you multiply by 1.5. That means you get 50% more. So you get more, 50% more. So, and then we're going to return what? 40. The first 40 hours, you're going to get paid normal pay rate. And then we're going to add overtime. So this is the weekly pay. And the last function is display. All that it does is just display the information that we have. So we're going to put return, let's say name of the employee. So we have name. And then we are going to start new line, \n, and then we're going to make only the weekly pay. And then weekly pay, we already have a function for that, weekly pay. All right. Let's see if there is anything missing here. So we have name. Oh, it's not return, it's cout, because we are printing this information. All right. So this is the two files. Now let's create the third file. That's where the main function is located. So I'm going to add a new item. I'm going to call it payroll. So the payroll, of course, you need to have include the header file, employee.h, and then we're going to include iostring, and then we may need string as well, and then using namespace std. Okay, so this is for the main function. So now let's create an example of an employee object before we move on to the manager class and establish an inheritance relationship. So let's create an example of an employee object. So we have employee, let's call it E1. So E1, So if you want to call the constructor, we can just put the name Mike. He works, let's say, for 35 hours, and he gets paid $40 per hour. Okay. So now let's call the sum of the function that we have here. Make sure everything is working. So I'm going to put here, let's say, I want to know the weekly pay of Mike. So I just have to call weekly pay. So I'm going to run the program and see if it is working. And sure enough, we got $1,400. That's 35 times 40. All right. Now let's call the display. So I'm going to put E1 display just to make sure everything is working as expected. So let me just start new line here. So I'm going to run the program. We should get the name and the weekly pay. And sure enough, name is Mike, weekly pay 1,400. We can add like a dollar sign if you want to here in display. Maybe we can go right here, and then we can add the dollar sign here. All right, so it looks like everything is working now. We should be able to move on to the next step, which is creating a second class that's going to be our subclass or the child class. And then we're going to establish a relationship in such a way that the manager will be able, an object from the manager class will be able to access the functions from the superclass, which is employee. All right, thank you for watching. And then please make sure that you watch the second part. Thank you.